morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. It's Wednesday, March 24th, 2021. And on this episode, I'm actually doing part two, a follow-up to Monday's episode, which was an overview of something called predictive policing. In short, I guess we could call it a dystopian, government-run pre-crime credit score program where they give you numbers based on stuff that has happened in your life. And then if you get too high of a number, they may start stalking you, surveilling you, following you, showing up your door. And I'm going to do a little bit more talking about its origins and some jaw-dropping numbers of how often one sheriff's department in Florida is actually stalking people. It's pretty insane. I got a few places where it's actually being implemented on a local level. One of them actually started out as a gun control program. What a surprise. And it starts out as one thing and it expands to another. And then I have some positive news. The 4 cities that have banned it since last summer. Hopefully there will be more on the way in the near future. But first of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage is 10thamendmentcenter.com/Path to Liberty. It's all spelled out, and that's where you're going to find everything you need to follow this program. All the archives of the show for 2.5 years. Individual episodes, I include a bunch of links so you can read and learn more. Sometimes I include references to previous episodes like I will today. So you can read, learn more, listen on your own time, because I'm really just scratching the surface and giving an overview in the first 30 to 40 minutes of this type of an episode. You can also find all the platforms we're on. We live stream on a bunch of mainstream ones, and hopefully we'll also be on Odyssey.com, which is decentralized and censorship resistant. Hopefully we'll be on that platform live streaming as they launch that in the near future as well. We have a bunch of other video platforms. We have audio-only podcast editions. Andrew in Missouri has been stopping over on YouTube and leaving comments to help push the algorithm to show the program to more people, but has been listening over on Podbean, for example, which I think is pretty awesome. We're also on Apple Podcasts and all the other main ones. Again, that show homepage is 10thamendmentcenter.com/Path to Liberty. And I want to say a quick hello to everyone out in the live chat while we give people a little bit more time, a few more moments to get notifications to join us for the live broadcast. First of all, I want to say a huge thank you to Josh for Liberty. He's been doing a lot of just work trying to spread the word with a group on Telegram, doing some outreach, helping us find some information on legislation. Thank you so much with a $100 super chat over on YouTube. He says, "Liberty by inches, folks. Vote with your wallets in support of a cause that transcends politics and mob rule, which is no friend of liberty at all." Of course, right? You can't have liberty safe when you have a choice, when the decision on who's going to have rights or not is based on a 5-4 vote or 100-99 vote. It doesn't matter. If it's the choice of just majority rule, you don't have liberty. He says, "Thanks for the work you do at TAC." Thank you so much, Josh. I appreciate that generous super chat as well. I also want to say hi to Tim Martin in Arizona, up in the Twin Cities, Funky Euphemism. Dixie Strong in Alabama, Clay Kent, Justin Morrison in Indiana, Melody Skaman, awesome to see you, Patricia Dance, Pro-Life, Pro-Liberty in Austin, Joe Sapienza, I apologize if I got that wrong, but that's an awesome name, in Rochester, New York, Thomas Chase, that Liberty gal, thank you for sharing this over on Facebook and commenting here on YouTube. InfoSec guy, the Senator DT, I appreciate your support and the work you're doing up in Elkhart, Indiana, sir, and everyone else. I apologize if I skipped anybody. I will look back at the live chat when I have a few minutes a little bit later in the show, and I always do read through comments later on, and I reply to at least a handful, and I look at emails at team@10thamendmentcenter.com to get ideas for future episodes. All right, let's get to this. I want to do a quick reminder that I did this episode on Monday, Predictive Policing, Weaponizing Data and Location. I'm going to link to it in the show notes. If you haven't watched it or listened to it yet, you really kind of need it as a precursor to understand an overview of what's going on. We know that a lot of times, or at least what I'm finding, I don't have all the dots connected, but every time I look into this and I see that one city started one of these programs that is basically doing pre-crime, determining where crime might happen by algorithm. And if you think about it, it creates this kind of feedback loop. If one area has a lot of crime and then the algorithm says, well, you've got to put more cop resources, more government resources in that area. And then where government resources are, they're going to make more arrests, more stop and frisk, more interactions. And if every interaction then goes into the database and gives points based on interaction with police, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a feedback loop, because every time you do that, then it's telling the algorithm that more and more stuff is happening there, and it's maybe not happening elsewhere. Now, maybe it isn't happening elsewhere, but if you're just reinforcing current situations, you're never going to actually, this isn't good police work in my mind. This is just some kind of dystopian garbage. So please check out that episode when you have a chance. Here from knockla.com, which was just published in the last couple of days. Let me see. Oh, it's a long scroll. It's a local blog here. And they're talking about two of the main programs that have been used here with the LAPD, which is one of the originators, really, that did it on a large scale. There's also Santa Cruz, which I'll cover in a little bit. But neither Predpol. There's Predpol, which is one company, and there's also Palantir, and there was the laser program. Predpol is in LA, these location-based predictive policing. They pick 500 by 500 square foot blocks, and they make a grid of the metropolitan area, and then it gets a kind of a threat score, kind of a color-coded threat score or number-coded, doesn't matter. And they're going to dump more resources into that area, start making more stops, start making more interactions, and then reinforcing the fact that there's going to be more data fed into the algorithm. The more times, if you think about it, like on social media, if you click on a conspiracy theory on Facebook, for example, Facebook's algorithm says, oh, well, this person didn't just scroll past this, but they engaged with it. They liked or clicked. And whether you think it's good or bad, or you just wanted to read something, the algorithm at Facebook is going to say, well, we need to find more content just like this to send to somebody. So it's each interaction reinforces what's already happening until it ends up being that everyone gets siloed and you only get the information that you've already heard about in the first place or you've already liked. And that's just kind of an unfortunate reality of how these algorithms work. But it also happens on a location basis. That was Predpol and LAPD. And then Laser is an individual version where they're actually giving an individual kind of a criminal activity potential credit score. They were not initially designed for domestic use. Both were born out of the early 2000s war on terror. Predpol is a direct descendant of military-funded university research based on statistics from the Iraq insurgency. This is a military occupation tool, and maybe it's great for that situation, but we don't want militarized tactics to be used by people who are supposed to be peace officers, following their oath to the Constitution for the United States, their oath to their Constitution for their state. They go on over at knockla.com. Laser draws on technology provided by Palantir. Palantir is the big Peter Thiel company, a big data company that mines government and corporate databases for signs of terrorist activity. The CIA was among the company's first clients. I've also read that the CIA's funding arm was the one who put up the seed money, but I haven't really verified that. I've seen it in a number of locations, but I haven't really confirmed it. It really seems like that was the case. And then if it turns out that they gave some money and then became one of the first clients, you see how this kind of circular government funding thing works as well. So the CIA was among the company's first clients at Palantir, and Palantir has since penned contracts with the Department of Defense, the FBI, the NSA, the FBI, NSA, and ICE. And here from Tech Dirt, this came from November of last year, they're talking about the Pasco County Sheriff's Department. I covered on Monday's episode how the Institute for Justice, IJ.org, which for a long time has been the leading organization pushing back on the government-sanctioned theft and highway robbery that is civil asset forfeiture. And I was really excited to see that they're actually trying to get involved in this predictive policing issue. The Pasco County Sheriff's Department has been giving people scores and then stalking them. And now I learned how often. Here's just one example. Tech Dirt reports that the office keeps a secret list of kids it thinks could, quote, fall into a life of crime. So they're actually doing this with children as well, 15-year-olds, younger, based on factors like whether they've gotten abused. So if you've been abused by parents, maybe there's some psychological study and someone needs therapy. I know, I've gone to therapy. It can be very helpful for people if you get a good therapist, right? If you go through abuse, you don't need a cop following you around. You need help. You need help to get out of that abusive situation. This isn't help. And maybe it even has good motivations. Maybe the Pasco County Sheriff's Department really thinks that they're helping people, but this is not the way to do it. So they get scores based on whether they've been abused or even gotten a D or an F in school. I got an F in accounting at one point when I was in high school, according to the agency's internal intelligence manual. The list itself, so once someone gets on this hot list, I pointed out on Monday's show that in Pasco County, there's about 100 people. And then once they're on that hot list, first of all, no one knows it. Parents don't know it. Kids don't know it. No one really knows. And in fact, like the no-fly list, which shouldn't exist on a federal level, these local kind of no-fly lists, these local kind of criminal credit scores that government is starting to use in a number of cities around the country, it really becomes a stalker list. And there's no way to get off of it. You have no way of finding out how you're on it. They say here at Tech Dirt, parents aren't notified whether their kids are put on the pre-criminal lists. Some school administrators seem largely aware their school's data is being used to profile minors. The sheriff's office, we got to give them their say on this. They claims it has been the recipient of student info and data for 2 decades. This, to me, I would just guess. My instinct tells me, yes, the schools are throwing information over to law enforcement. Law enforcement is happy to use this back and forth. These are both government-run organizations. It's a great reason to homeschool kids. Not that I have any experience in this, but being in the government school system, they're propaganda centers in the first place, and the more that people can get out of that, the better. They're often treated like prisoners. Here from Electronic Frontier Foundation, they pointed out that one 15-year-old was arrested for stealing a bicycle out of a garage. Not good, but the algorithm continuously then dispatched police to harass him and his family. Over a span of 5 months, police went to his home 21 times. They also, what they're doing is they're saying, well, this person is a potential high crime person in Pasco County. We need to just start showing up. And I'm not sure if they're saying I saw a document, kind of internal memo where they're basically taking the view that this is helpful to the person because once they're reminded that they're being kind of watched, they might not commit as much crime and therefore they're keeping them from, getting arrested, for example. So this in the mentality of these kind of dystopian pre-crime people, advocates, this is good. So EFF points out that they also showed up at his gym and his parents' place of work. Oh, your kid did something that they shouldn't have done, committed a crime when they were a teenager. Once this is over, we're going to start showing up at your workplace. That could be very problematic for some employers. You may be the first one on the chopping block, especially in a time when a lot of companies are making cutbacks. This is not the right way to deal with things. The Tampa Bay Times revealed that since 2015, this is in a county of 500,000 people where they're putting the top 100 in this score. They're taking 100 people and visiting them on a regular basis, any time of day, various locations. Since 2015, the sheriff's office had made more than 12,500 similar preemptive visits to people. So this is pre-crime. Police showing up at people's door, police showing up at people's parents' places of work, and just kind of following them and reminding them that they're being watched so they don't get busted as help to them. I think that's jaw-dropping, the amount that it's happening. But they're not the only one. And some of the companies I mentioned, so there's Predpol, there's Palantir, there's also Azavea, there's Key Stats, but here's an interesting one, and I didn't even realize they were involved in this, and I think I did an episode covering this company for a different reason a couple of years ago, but there's a company called ShotSpotter, and here from Worcester, Mass, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. My sister lives in Boston, and I probably would get a reprimand if I get this wrong. Worcester, Mass is using... They actually just implemented pre-crime or just approved by lawmakers there just in this month. So sometime this was reported at State Scoop on March 15th, and they say the decision last Tuesday to approve local police software that uses artificial intelligence to direct patrol routes drew quick criticism from local and statewide civil rights groups. They're basically just approved this. They said, we're going to go ahead and use this. But what are they doing? They're actually expanding on something they already had called ShotSpotter. The software is called ShotSpotter Connect, which joins a portfolio that also includes ShotSpotter's gunshot detection devices, which have been mounted on utility poles and building roofs in Worcester since 2014. So, of course, to protect us is always a thing, but they're including these algorithm-based and listening devices on utility poles. I don't know where else they have these things. I should actually do more research on ShotSpotter, but now ShotSpotter is kind of doing a 1-2 punch. They're not only doing gun control support for government, they're also adding this AI predictive policing. So that's in Worcester, Mass. Not a good turn of events over there. In San Jose, just last fall, the city council here from San Jose Spotlight approved a budget request from the police department to acquire predictive policing software, a tool whose algorithms are riddled with racial biases. I know that a lot of these tools like facial recognition, and I've talked about it, and the predictive policing are very racially biased. It's also bad data in, gets garbage out, of course. But the problem isn't the fact that they're racially biased. That is a problem, but that isn't the root issue. The fact of the matter is the more that they use it, even when people complain about racial bias, if that's all you think the problem is, over time, the algorithms will improve and it will eliminate the racial bias, or it can be programmed in a way so that some of the general public is like, well, at least it's getting an equal amount of people based on race and we don't have to worry about it anymore. Then everybody is under it. Now, I don't like the fact that some people are getting abused by government more than me, for example, right now. But I don't want anyone abused by this type of thing. So anyways, City Council in San Jose just approved it, but it was also buried. It was just buried in a line item budget request to the city council, and it was done through federal funds. I haven't dug through the actual budget request in San Jose. Maybe if we have any listeners up there, someone can actually figure this out. But last fall, this was reported. This was just reported on Monday. So that's really interesting. So it looks like they're considering maybe restricting this, but they just did this budget request to approve it. I'm not sure what's going to happen, and I'm not sure exactly how they got the funding, but at least that report is saying that a lot of the other surveillance tools they've gotten were for just line item budget requests that came through federal grant programs. It's not just in some of these big cities or kind of the more blue statey type places. It's also happening in red state America. Here, for example, from birminghamwatch.org, predictive policing software programs such as Predpol have grown in popularity among law enforcement agencies over the past decade, including adoption by the Homewood Police Department in Alabama, and the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office in 2016, and the Birmingham Police Department in 2019. So it's actually happening in Alabama. And here from CBS42.com, they point out just in December, the Birmingham City Council voted back then to extend the city's contract with Predpol for another 3 years. And in agreeing to this 3-year contract extension, the Birmingham Police Department has already been using the software for about 2 years. So I just wanted to point out some of the places that this has been happening. A lot of times, Predpol or Palantir or one of these other companies that is providing the service, they do it with a direct contact to the law enforcement agency. It never even goes through public review. It happens in total secret. And there was an interesting report at Motherboard a couple of years ago talking about this. This was in February of 2019, that dozens of cities have been secretly experimenting with predictive policing software. They did a bunch of Freedom of Information Act requests or open records requests, depending on the city, depending on the state. And they say documents obtained by Motherboard using public information requests verify previously unconfirmed police department contracts with predictive policing company Predpol. This was actually originally uncovered months earlier by a guy named Corey Doctorow, who does a lot of really good anti-surveillance research, and he had found kind of a breadcrumb, or someone had sent him one, pointing out that a lot of law enforcement agencies were literally they actually had websites, URLs set up for like birmingham.predpol.com or predpol.birminghampolice.com. And he's like, well, I haven't verified, and I've reached out to some of these police agencies, and they say specifically they're not using it. And then Motherboard does some research and some open records requests, and they find out that there were contracts signed in a lot of those places. So, for example, contract negotiation emails were released from police departments in South Jordan, Utah, Mountain View, California, Atlanta, Georgia, Haverhill, Georgia, Palo Alto, and Modesto, California, Merced, all over California. You guys can call it my home, California, all you want these days. Livermore, California, Tacoma, and UC Berkeley. So they found a bunch of places where this has been used. I will link to that in the show notes so you can read through the whole thing and see if maybe your city or something that you're familiar with is on that list. We also know here from The Verge a couple of years ago that Palantir has secretly used New Orleans to test its predictive policing technology. Here's how they put it. Palantir deployed a predictive policing system in New Orleans that even city council members didn't know about. So they literally, one of the ways that this happens is somehow they find a loophole in the grant system and they make a deal directly with law enforcement. So then it doesn't get any public oversight. There's no pushback. They install the thing. They start using it. They start collecting data. And then when there's a bunch of complaints about it years later, then they can deal with it at that point. This was in February of 2018 that they had already been using this for quite a while. I'm not sure when it went in. I'd probably have to read through to find that detail again. Oh, here it is. The program began in 2012. This is again from The Verge. As a partnership between New Orleans Police and Palantir Technologies, a data mining firm founded with seed money from the CIA's venture capital firm. Predictive policing technology, they write, has proven highly controversial wherever it's implemented. But in New Orleans, the program escaped public notice, partly because Palantir established it as a philanthropic relationship with the city through Mayor Mitch Landrieu's signature NOLA for Life program. Thanks to its philanthropic status, as well as New Orleans' strong mayor model of government, the agreement never passed through a public procurement process. So they just started using it for, this was already 6 years at that point. Imagine how much data you're getting in a place like New Orleans over 6 years and no one even knows it's happening. Who knows? I mean, maybe even the local law enforcement really weren't aware and it was just a data mining. It was done higher up. I don't really know. But thankfully enough, in December of this last year, there was enough people upset about this, and it took almost 3 years, because if this really was reported in February of 2018 that they had been secretly doing this for 6 years, people were really upset. I'd heard about it a couple times over the last couple of years, and finally in December of 2020, here from the lensnola.org, it's a local publication for New Orleans, the New Orleans City Council passed a new law on Thursday, this was back on December 18th, 2020, that regulates certain parts of the city's surveillance system and places an outright ban on specific pieces of surveillance technology, including facial recognition software and predictive policing. So some positive news. New Orleans, not the first city to actually do this, but especially after this kind of secret deal that happened right between Palantir, the mayor's office, and local law enforcement agencies to install this stuff and just get it done. I wonder what people were thinking as cameras were being installed, or maybe they were just tapping into the regular cameras. I don't actually know, but it amazes me how often we learn about these things that have happened for many years. For example, one of the things that we work on pretty regularly when it comes to privacy and surveillance is ALPRs, automated license plate readers, which can snap pretty accurately up to the top of the line ones, can do up to like 800 license plates per minute. Some of them are actually being outfitted with facial recognition software as well, so they can figure out who's a passenger in a rideshare service, for example. So people are being tracked, even if they leave their phone at home or somehow made a Faraday cage for it or something like that. You can be tracked merely by getting in your car. They're keeping records of this. They're passing along to the DEA. We learned around 2018 again, this was in a report from Reuters, and I'm not sure who the leaker was on this, but basically the DEA, which shouldn't exist as well, like the ATF and so many of these other unconstitutional federal agencies, the DEA had been running this nationwide license plate tracking program, keeping records on where people go. And you can just use your imagination to think about, like, if you attended a protest, you went to a particular store, you went to a particular church, you went to a meeting, doesn't matter what it is, met with a friend, and they have tabs on where you're going. And they had kept that for 8 years before it was uncovered. And it was the local law enforcement doing the license plate tracking. The local governments, the state governments, were collecting the data and feeding the information through fusion centers or information sharing environment to the feds. And I'm certain the same type of thing, especially if it's CIA seed money, if it's an Iraq insurgency military tool, this stuff, which comes with federal grants in every situation I've seen so far, and then the information we know, surveillance information, is always shared with local fusion centers, and then it becomes federal property as well. So anyways, New Orleans City Council, which had this secret deal going on, the people got sick of it, put enough pressure on the local city council members where they thought it was politically popular enough to say, no, we're not going to use this. I'm not sure if any of those people are good people when it comes to the Constitution and liberty. I'm assuming not. But who knows? Maybe there's a couple of good ones that took the lead. I'm assuming it was more just local pressure, people being really pissed off. Now, Santa Cruz, along with the LAPD, of course, it's here in California, which really has been leading the way on this. You would think New York and Chicago as well are probably at the top of that list. But in 2011, Santa Cruz began testing technology like this with historical crime data, and the algorithm predicted about a third of the crimes within a given location. So they were able to predict crimes, but you're not really, EFF points out that you're not able to necessarily predict. You create this crazy feedback loop, and sometimes those numbers are skewed. Anyways, in 2017, officials in Santa Cruz put a moratorium. They said, well, we got to look at this a little further. Let's put it on hold. And then last summer, the first vote on it was in June of 2020, and then they had a final approval of an ordinance. For those of you who've heard me talk about local sanctuary efforts, you got to make sure in almost every community that you're not just passing a resolution. A resolution could actually say some really good things, but if it does not have a binding clause in it that has the force of law, it does nothing. It's just talk, and sometimes it's just grandstanding. But in Santa Cruz, they passed an ordinance unanimously that bans the use of predictive policing in Santa Cruz, first city in the country. I mean, this is pretty modern stuff, and there hasn't really been a lot of opposition to it like we've seen on a local level to some other issues. We haven't seen this type of organizing. So Santa Cruz really got the ball rolling. We know that New Orleans banned it. In Pittsburgh, the city council in September of 2020, they voted to regulate the use of facial recognition and predictive policing technologies. This is at publicsource.org. Any of these things they couldn't use by city entities, including the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police. The legislation requires city approval of such technologies before they are even acquired or used, except in an emergency situation. I'm a little concerned about a loophole, but we'll see how that plays out. It's probably pretty hard to use predictive policing algorithms if you're not feeding data into it on a regular basis. So to say, well, we've got an escaped, I don't know, a child abduction or something like that. All of a sudden, you use predictive policing if you're not feeding the data in. I don't know how effective that can be. So maybe this is actually going to be okay. It is an actual ban. They did leave it open to say, well, maybe in the future we'll do it. It's beyond just a moratorium. It's beyond a pause. No one's allowed to actually use this at all, except in emergency situations. So we'll see how it plays out in Pittsburgh, if that's positive. So we've got New Orleans, Santa Cruz, Pittsburgh, and then in city of Oakland, just at the beginning of this year, 2021. In January, the Oakland City Council, this is from EFF.org, they voted unanimously to strengthen the city's already groundbreaking surveillance and community safety ordinance. They added an amendment to it so you can start with one thing, and then as you learn, you expand and you get better. They added an amendment which immediately went into effect. This is around January 15th. It adds a prohibition to Oakland's police department of using predictive policing technology. So we now have 4 relatively major cities that have done this. There may be another one out there. I know in Annapolis, this just happened. This was also in December, so it's starting to catch on. At the end of last year, at the beginning of this year, the Annapolis City Council in Maryland, they voted down a grant to get funding to do this. It was a $100,000 grant appropriation that was provided by Governor Larry Hogan's office. Generally, those types of grants are like a state-federal partnership. I don't know the exact details of the one in Annapolis, but there was a 5-4 vote. I mean, if you're talking about $100,000, going to law enforcement in Annapolis, Maryland, I'm actually surprised that it passed, that they said, no, we're going to turn down the money. Now, this is not a prohibition on it, so it's a step in the right direction. But it's so close that I think if they upped it to 150 grand, you might see a 4-5 vote. I'm not sure what'll happen in Annapolis, But in essence, we really have 4, 5. Now, they may already be using stuff like this and they don't have the ongoing funding. And I'm assuming like other places like Dallas, Chicago, and other cities, a lot of this stuff is being implemented already and the data is being shared, but who knows? We know that they were actually able to reject this due to a lot of public pressure. So I think that's very positive news, and I like to be able to share some positive news once in a while, especially after there's always so much negativity going on in our social interactions online, whenever people are talking about politics, issues of the Constitution and liberty, current events, and things like that. There was a lot of negative in this episode because we see these cities implementing them, we see the secret deals happening. But to see that 4 cities have finally started to say no and gives you an idea of what you can do in your own town. I guess you have to dig out and find whether or not the local law enforcement or the government has approved this type of thing. And then you just start making phone calls to city council members. Hey, I live in your district. I want to make sure that they don't use facial recognition in this city. I don't want to have predictive policing. Can we get this ordinance introduced? EFF is a good place to start to get recommendations, EFF.org. I'm going to include all these links in the show notes and take a look over on the live chat. Jay Armstrong is absolutely right, calling this Minority Report a pre-crime, without a doubt. Thomas Chase, this is a great question, because really this is kind of what we're facing. How do you stop a loaded freight train going downhill without brakes? Are you going to stand in front of it? No, absolutely not. But we don't actually have to help it go faster. And I think that is kind of where we are. We're living under the largest government in the history of the world. We're living under the largest empire in the history of the world. We don't want to do nothing. We also don't want to risk our own lives and what we have with our family, our friends, our future. I don't want anyone putting their neck on the line. And we have to be smart about the strategy here. And we always have to think about the risk. All armed government, Thomas also says, are a mortal threat. Taking a look, Vince Linebeck says drug users aren't criminals. Yeah, so much already. And I saw a comment somewhere else, I think it was on Facebook, on the schedule for this episode, where someone actually made the really good point that so much crime today, so much of what people get arrested for really is already pre-crime. Like if you don't have your seatbelt on and you get a ticket, it's really, you're getting a ticket for what might happen, not what did happen. If you own a firearm that they say you're not allowed to own, they're going to charge you with a crime for owning something because you might use it in a way that they don't approve, or that they can't come and get it if they don't know where it is. So these are crime. This is all pre-crime already. And there's probably a lot of other ways that we can think about this as well. And this is just more of a technological, technocracy version of it as well. Vince also says DEA is in my top 3 most hated 3-letter agencies. I'd be curious what the other ones. DEA is one of mine, ATF, probably DHS or TSA for sure. There's so many. I guess we could think of the Federal Reserve. Clay Kent over on Facebook says, interesting that they chose the word Palantir for its company name, a magical crystal ball. I didn't know that. Did you look that up? That's pretty fascinating. I submit that magical artifacts from Middle Earth is absolutely no basis for executing the responsibilities of any government in the real world. Just saying. That is an awesome comment. Melody, got to run. I appreciate you being here, and hi to Blue North as well. Josh for Liberty says seatbelts is a victimless crime. Absolutely. People are absolutely. This is a pre-crime way of saying we're protecting you from what you might do to yourself. If you own a plant that they say you can't grow, it's because you might harm yourself. They're always protecting us from ourselves or what could happen in the future, rather than for something that some aggression. If we're talking about like non-aggression principle, Thomas Jefferson at some point actually said the sum of good government is really to let people be free to do their own interests and only deal with things where they've harmed each other, committed force, used force or fraud against each other. That's the sum of good government if you're going to have it at all in the first place. I want to take a quick little scroll again to see if there's anything else that I can answer. Tim Martin, this is great. California extends to Oregon and Washington. And I always kind of reject that view, that comment, and I don't like saying it, but the fact that I'm pointing out so many localities in my state here that are doing this, yeah, go for it. We're going to have to call it that. And I think it extends through much of the country, really, if we're talking about this type of thing happening all over the place. Anyways, I will look a little bit more through the chat a little bit later today. Please continue leaving comments, whether it's live or in the archive. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you learned something. And if you are really interested in this, I hope you take some action in your own town to learn what's going on. Are they using this type of thing? If they are, what can you do to get it banned? And let's also think about things like facial recognition surveillance, license plate reader, and all kinds of stuff that all really ties together into this nationwide surveillance state. The more that the local police collect data like this, the more every time they collect it on a local level, they are absolutely dumping that information into whatever regional, I think there's about 70 of them now, regional fusion center, or through information sharing environment. This is post-Patriot Act kind of garbage. And they're sharing this with federal agencies like the DEA, the ATF, and some of the other hated ones that shouldn't exist in the first place. So if you like what we're doing, you learned something, you thought this was a good episode, you like the TAC, please smash the like, leave some comments, subscribe, get notifications, all that stuff, including reviews on Apple Podcasts and elsewhere. That all tells those algorithms, it triggers them, and it tells them to show the program to more people. So let's trigger those algorithms, not the other government-run ones. And of course, if you want to put your financial faith behind our work, I'm very grateful for Josh for Liberty for that super chat over on YouTube at the beginning of the show. Thank you. And if I missed anybody else with another super chat, I apologize. I'll get back to you a little bit later, though. But you can go to 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. If you get an annual membership, you get this 110% 10ther card we'll send out. We also have online memberships that start out as little as $2 a month. And that helps us more than anything reach and teach more people about the Constitution and liberty and the use of nullification to advance both. Again, that's 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me today. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time here on the path to liberty.